There is no doubt that we condemn in the strongest possible terms the use of chemical weapons. And you're right. We even said before there was an intelligence community assessment that chemical weapons had been used, that those individuals who are responsible for safeguarding chemical weapons would be held accountable for the way that those chemical weapons are handled. So there are a range of consequences for the actions that have possibly taken place. It's hard for me to speak to whether or not they feel threatened, but there is a broad international view that the use of chemical weapons is completely unacceptable. Even some people who may disagree with us on some aspects of our policy related to Syria should be able to agree that the use of chemical weapons is completely unacceptable and should be able to support a robust and impartial, credible investigation into reports that chemical weapons may have been used.
That is Deputy Press Secretary Josh Earnest answering questions about the use of chemical weapons, more reports of them of late by the Syrian regime against civilians, not the rebels, but the civilians. Joining us now, he is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He is a writer for the Weekly Standard, and he is also senior editor of the Long War Journal. Our good friend, Thomas Jocelyn. Tom, welcome back. How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I guess I want to ask you about the use of chemical weapons at some point, but I guess it begs a greater question, and that question is this. The events in Egypt, as you are looking at them, are you looking at them regionally, or are you segregating each country out and talking about the inner conflicts within each? Syria, Egypt, we could go down the line. We can go to Iraq, in fact. My point is, should we be looking regionally, or should we be looking specifically segregating these countries out and individually analyzing them?
Well, I mean, you have to do both, I think. I mean, I think you see that, regionally you have the Middle East is in more turmoil today and more fighting and violence and bloodshed today than probably at any point in time in recent history. The death toll in Syria certainly, matches what took place throughout the entirety of the Iraq War at this point, which, spanned years. This is, really quite something to watch. I mean, you basically have America withdrawing from the Middle East, basically not putting forward any strategy. There's no sort of game plan for dealing with all this. It's just ad hoc sort of, one-off, press conferences here and there with no real strategy for dealing with what's going on. And meanwhile, as I've argued on repeatedly now, as you know, Al-Qaeda has gamed out the situation, Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, and they are arguably stronger today than they've ever been. They have more people fighting under Al-Qaeda's banner today than certainly on September 11, 2001, and really at any point in time that I can remember. They have a small army in Syria, not so small army in Syria. They have hundreds, possibly thousands of fighters in the North Sinai. They have thousands of fighters in Iraq. They have thousands of fighters all throughout North Africa. They have thousands of fighters in the Horn of Africa, and then thousands more fighters in Yemen. Really, the Middle East is right now in a state of turmoil, which is really unfortunate, of course, and awful to watch. But at the same time that our enemies are raising their black banner and are on the march, really, America has no answer.
Let's talk about that black banner and the flag of Al-Qaeda. You mentioned in previous interviews regarding the protest and attack on our embassy in Cairo. Obviously, 9/11, we put a focus on the American consulate in Benghazi because of the deaths of 4 Americans, including our ambassador. But they had what they had in Libya, absolutely. They also had something in Egypt, and they flew. You pointed this out. I didn't see it any from other sources. They flew the black flag of Al-Qaeda over our embassy. Should we draw a distinction between the Muslim Brotherhood and what they are doing and Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, well, I mean, the two are related, but they're not one for one. I mean, there are large differences between the two, or significant differences between the two. They're not the same organization. They are different organizations. they have differences in how they operate. Al-Qaeda does, however, come out of Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and really the forefather of Al-Qaeda's ideology and Al-Qaeda's style of terrorism was a very influential Muslim Brotherhood thinker named Sayyid Qutb, whose thinking within the Brotherhood and guiding of the Brotherhood sort of very much became how Al-Qaeda views the world and how Al-Qaeda went about conducting itself. However, within the Brotherhood, they sort of made accommodations to the Egyptian regime over years and eschewed direct violence inside Egypt proper, not elsewhere. They advocated violence elsewhere, and sort of tried to come about sort of a social solution to implementing their paradigm inside Egypt, which was different from how Al-Qaeda operated. However, there are a large degree of ideological similarity between the two. They're not wholly distinct either. But when you talk about the embassy in Cairo, it's a very direct thing that happened here. I mean, I've got the video. You can download the video online and see it, where the brother of Al-Qaeda's emir, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, his brother really played a large role in orchestrating the protest turned assault on the U.S. Embassy in Cairo on September 11, 2012. Several other well-known Al-Qaeda jihadists were involved in that event as well. The entire affair was pro-Al-Qaeda chants, pro-Osama bin Laden chants, and they raised dozens of black flags, including the one over our embassy. And that scene was repeated at a couple other embassies in the days that followed, in addition to the attack in Benghazi. So, when I look at that whole picture, I see that whole picture back in September 2012 was not a spontaneous reaction to an obscure video. It was something that looked a lot more coordinated to my eye. And, earlier this month, we shut down more than 20 diplomatic facilities across the North Africa, through the Middle East, and South Asia. So clearly there's a recognition by the U.S. government that Al-Qaeda is, in fact, gunning for our diplomatic facilities.
Is the Muslim Brotherhood working with Al-Qaeda? And if so, is part of the strategy to eradicate Christians not only from Egypt but the entire region?
Well, I think you see the Brotherhood is not the peace-loving organization that some people in Washington try to make it out to be today on the ground in Egypt. The degree to which they're working with Al-Qaeda that's a very complex topic, actually. It's not as simple as saying they're in bed together. There are instances of overlap between the two, but there are also instances where they're not on the same page. So it's a complex topic. But I'll say this: the bottom line is that the ideology that the Brotherhood embodies is something that is antithetical to Western interests, to our values, to who we are, and the idea that we can think about this organization as something that is a hedge or a blocking mechanism to the more radical elements throughout the Middle East, I think, is just fundamentally wrong.
They outlined in the project, from what I gather, it is a blueprint on how to move, and I'm speaking to the Muslim Brotherhood, how to move ahead. And if they can do it through political Islam and use the political system, they will do it. They certainly have manipulated the system of PR. We see that even in our own country and our own institutions. So I know that you're connecting the dots here, and you're certainly doing that with Al-Qaeda and Islamists worldwide. My question is, do we have an opportunity to put down the Brotherhood in Egypt and send a signal that when they do manipulate the system and abuse it, there is a consequence to that? Yeah,
well, I mean, it's a very complex topic. I mean, basically, the Brotherhood, in my opinion, and based on what their machinations were inside Egypt, they were looking to consolidate power in a very undemocratic way. So to the people who said that the Muslim Brotherhood's rise through supposedly democratic elections in Egypt should be celebrated, I think that was flat false. I mean, the bottom line is they were looking to figure out a way to try and consolidate power. Now, the problem for them was that they didn't control the army, they didn't control the military and much of the sort of security services inside Egypt. So they weren't going to get away with that, and eventually that's what led to the coup, the overthrowing of Mohamed Morsi, Egyptian president. So you're really left with a couple bad options here. With the military overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood now, which gets rid of the immediate problem of the Brotherhood's machinations inside Egypt, you're also left with the potential now for basically driving Brotherhood followers and others into sort of Al-Qaeda's arms and seeing the inflaming the violence on the Egyptian streets like we're seeing today. Now, maybe that was going to happen anyway. Who knows? But the problem here is when people talk about events like inside Egypt, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer in terms of what our policy should be, other than, I would say, openly embracing the Brotherhood or that type of ideology. That clearly, to me, was a mistake.
Okay. Tell me, you would have 30 minutes with the president. We're dealing with Egypt. We're dealing with Syria. Red lines have been crossed again and again. What do you tell him to do? Three things you say, Mr. President, you've got to do these three things right now. What are they?
Well, the first thing is to, I think, abandon the rhetoric that Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups are, on the path to defeat. The idea that you're taking us off of war footing, which is something the president has been very firm about and has repeated over and over again in a very dogmatic way. I think that's clearly wrong. The administration sees the Al-Qaeda threat and diagnoses it, I think, in a way that's very misleading. They talk about it as if the Al-Qaeda core is this distinct group in Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're the ones who were responsible for attacks on 9/11, and they're decimated. So all these other Al-Qaeda groups, including their armies marching in Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere, are not something we really have to worry about as sort of a first-order threat. I really disagree with that. I think that Al-Qaeda's armies marching on that black banner is a cohesive threat to the U.S. and our interests. And so, abandoning the rhetoric and getting us back on a war footing is the right way to go, however popular or unpopular that may be. The second thing is, this policy of basically retreat from the Middle East hasn't worked. If you look at what the president said about leaving Iraq and that, he had ended the war in Iraq, that's not true. Al-Qaeda to continue to fight on, doubled their operational capacity throughout the year of 2012, doubled their number of recruits, and spawned a whole new affiliate inside Syria after American forces left. American forces left, the violence got much worse. The war is not over. Our enemies keep fighting. So all this, I think, would lead to my ultimate advice, which would be to say you're going to have to figure out a way to use American force throughout these battlefields. That's something that we can debate about how to do that appropriately, what the appropriate amount of American military force is, but some degree of force is going to be needed, some degree of military intervention, not on the scale of Iraq, not on the scale of possibly what happened in Afghanistan, but you're going to have to figure out something because all this is just spiraling out of control right now.
Tom Jocelyn, we always wish we had more time. Thank you very much for taking your very valuable time to spend it with us. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Take care. That is Tom Jocelyn. He is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, senior editor at the Long War Journal, and writer for the Weekly Standard. Coming up, Dr. Mark Calabria, director of regulation studies at the Cato Institute, is going to explain how regulation is costing jobs. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.